I really want to welcome everybody. This is my trial run of running a one of these Zoom meetings, and I have a really big one next Friday that I'm running for about 150 people. So if I can pull this off, I'm going to feel a lot better about next week. I appreciate so much all of the speakers who are joining us today, and for those of you who are participants, this is a combined workshop for me. In past years, I usually do a program a little bit earlier, and this one was scheduled for March 24th, where I was going to have a couple of MD PhD program directors come and talk about MD PhD, is it right for me, what's the path, admissions things, and Dr. Keegan has very generously agreed to come and speak with us from the University of Maryland MSTP program. And then a second program that I usually do right around this time of year is this little fireside chat with students who have been a little further along in the process. And this year, actually, because we're doing it online, it's kind of an opportunity to bring in a few more of my MSTP students who are all around the country who would otherwise not be able to join us. So that's kind of a silver lining, I guess. And we have with us also one student, I still don't see him yet, but hopefully he'll make it soon, who is a current applicant, and he has just finished this application cycle. So what I hope is you'll learn a lot about the way these programs run and operate and whether or not it's the right decision for you. And then you'll hear a little bit from our students who have been doing this for a while and why they chose it and why it seems right for them. And then we'll do some just Q&A and just sort of have at it kinds of stuff, and hopefully you'll learn everything you came to learn. So let's see. So just a little bit of an overview of who you're talking with today. So Dr. Keegan is the Associate Director of the MSTP program at University of Maryland, and Ali is my furthest along MSTP, I think. What year are you in, Ali?
5th total, 3rd PhD. Okay,
yeah, so you're getting close.
Yeah, I guess I'm getting closer to being a 6th year, which is kind of weird, but
yeah. And Ali, like Nipun, was originally interested in a very non-traditional track. I don't know if you wound up doing that, though. I'm sure you'll talk about it. And then Bilal, who is, I got your years right? You're both graduated in 15. Mike, did you graduate in 15? Okay. So yep. Bilal graduated from Maryland in 15 and is at Northwestern now in the MSTP program. And Michael, same year, and I think you might be in the same year in MSTP because I think you both took 1 year in between. Did you know each other?
Yeah, we knew each other pretty well.
I would think because you're both BioE same year, so that would be weird if you didn't.
We shared a lot of classes together, a lot of projects. Yeah,
awesome.
Good to see you, Michael.
Very nice. And then finally, we have Nipun, who is somebody who just completed this year's process. And so he's going to talk a little bit more about like what are the interviews like, and you can ask those kinds of questions too. So this is my general plan. I'm going to do a little bit of introductions. All of the speakers are going to just introduce themselves, and then we'll switch over to Dr. Keegan's presentation. So why don't we start with the students introducing, and then Dr. Keegan, you'll introduce yourself and do your presentation. And then we'll do the Q&A. So for all of you who are participating, as your questions come up, I was hoping that you would use the chat function, and that way I can sort of be monitoring and, you know, hopefully be able to get your questions all directed to the panelists, and we'll work on it that way. So just as they come to you, jot them down in the chat, and I'll bring you all in later for the Q&A. And at this point, if there's no objection, I'd like to turn on the recording. And I wanted to record this session in case there are people who were hoping to be able to join and weren't able to. Is that okay with everybody?
It's fine.
Okay, good enough. Now I just have to figure out how to do that. Okay.
Wendy, it shows it's already recording.
Oh,
Yeah, it
good thing
does.
it's okay with you guys. All right, very good. Thank you. So why don't we go ahead and we'll start with Allie. We'll go through the students, and then Dr. Keegan, we will have you take over from there with your slides.
Okay.
All right?
Anything in particular I should cover, or?
Oh, just I wanted you to talk about, you know, why you chose, you know, where you are, what you're studying, why you thought MD PhD was the right path for you, and you know, anything that you feel like you wish you had known, maybe that might have been useful, like a tip or two. And we'll, you know, and then we'll keep, you know, keep this part a little bit tight, and then we'll do more with Q&A.
Okay, sounds
Okay.
good. So I'm Allie. I'm a 5th year overall, 3rd year PhD student at WashU MSTP in St. Louis, Missouri. I graduated from Maryland in 2012 and took 2.5 gap years before I matriculated. I was a psychology major, and I was actually very set on a clinical psychology PhD program, and met with Wendy during my 2nd semester junior year, and she was like, "Oh, you sound like a great candidate for MD PhD programs." And I said, "What?" So I needed more time to finish on my prerequisites, but clearly I think it was the right choice for me, so I'm glad to have had that input. I'm in my PhD program. I'm in a human and statistical genetics PhD program by name, but effectively I'm kind of combining public health training and doing more epidemiology type research. I study cigarette smoking during pregnancy and understanding individual and environmental influences on that. And I think one of the biggest takeaways I have is, I think during the application, I had a very set idea of what I wanted to do in an MD PhD program, which is wholly different than what I'm doing in the MD PhD program. And I think having a set idea served me through the application cycle, because I think you kind of have to see an end in order to agree that an 8-year program is the right fit for you. But I think you get a lot of opportunities once you're actually in the program, and you do 2 years of med school, and you meet a lot of different faculty, and figure out that there are multiple paths to an end. That's, you know, all of the motivations I have for what I'm pursuing are the same, but the path that I'm taking to achieve those looks different than I thought it would.
Is Wendy frozen?
Who's next?
Sorry, the first gap, I was caught reading an email, but it was from one of you guys. I thought it was maybe somebody asking to be let into the chat. So anyway, I'll get back to that in a minute. Bilal, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Nice to meet you, Allie. Hey, everyone. My name is Bilal Naved. I am a current 4th year at Northwestern University's MSTP program. Graduated in the class 2015 from Maryland. There I was studying bioengineering. And while I was at Maryland, I got to participate in a few different research areas, but I would say that my kind of biggest area of focus was in bone tissue engineering. So I was working to understand how we could use stem cells, mesenchymal stem cells particularly, and seed them into 3D printed scaffolds for the purposes of regenerating bone. And my research interests I will say the interest changed, and the actual research I was doing towards that, there were a number of stepping stones I took here in the program at Northwestern. So now I'm in my 2nd year of PhD, the PhD phase, and my research is in understanding 3-dimensional kidney organoid models and how we can use them to model kidney diseases and test new therapeutics. I work at the interface of that in nanotechnology, so kind of developing nanoparticles to try and modulate things in the kidneys. So using the organoids to understand how that can be done. But my projects are not going particularly well, so I might be shifting. and that's how things go. And that's something I've learned along the way, to actually appreciate that, the sort of flexibility you have along the way, to try and test and fail various things. And actually, in some ways, the failures can be a lot of fun. You learn a lot of things in the process and can, you know, pivot from them. And so that's something I wish I had better understood coming into the program. I think, like Ali, I had a very set idea of what I wanted to explore and learn more about, and that has changed in all the best ways possible. I would say everything has gone wonderfully wrong. So, you know, be open to that concept. And there really is, what Ali was saying is really true, that, you know, in 2 years of medical school, you will learn, be exposed to so many things and find so many interests that you never knew you had, and that be open to those, because you'll spend the next 4 or 5 years after that really having the flexibility to research and learn about anything you would like to. And so, you know, being open-minded to letting my interests change, I think, is something that I learned along the way.
Thanks. Michael?
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, Bilal. Thanks, Ali. And also thanks to, let's see, Michael, Nelson, Debbie, Chris, John, Rodrigo, for having your cameras on. There's like 12 other people, 10 other people. Put your cameras on so that it doesn't look like half of the wall is just black.
Yes. I like it.
But in any case, my name is Michael Sikorsky, and I, like Bilal, did bioengineering at University of Maryland. I graduated in 2015. I took 1 year off. I actually deferred my admission to medical school. I had earned a Fulbright and a Whitaker scholarship to do like tissue engineering research abroad in Spain. And that was obviously a really, really fun experience, and a really educational experience as well, because it tipped my interests. After already having done quite a bit of research in undergrad, it really, really just confirmed that that's what I wanted to do next. Also, interestingly, after deferring admission at Maryland for a year, I go to University of Maryland School of Medicine, and I then ended up joining as an MD only, which is a bit less common. That particular year, though, happened to have 3 seats available in the MD PhD class, and so when I had my sort of research review meetings with the research office at Maryland, they had identified that I had a research background. I had done that year abroad, and after an internal application process and interviewing, I ended up joining in my first year. So it's very funny to me because I actually had met Dr. Keegan and our other program staff, Jane Bacon. Oh my gosh, when I was a sophomore, I think, in college.
Yeah, you were an undergrad.
Visiting. Yeah, and they were so resourceful and responsive, and really helped me always understand what that program would be like. And finally, once I was, I would say, mature enough to commit, I did. And I'm very, very happy with what I have chosen to do. One bit of advice would be, I guess, I picked sort of 1 or 2 things that were very important to me and how I wanted my research to feel. And then I just let the rest be quite broad. And those 2 things for me was, I've never thrived more or grown more than that time abroad when I was speaking Spanish and working in a lab group where you have to be very humble and just ask questions because everything's going to be different. So having that international exposure and opportunity to grow was big for me. So I took research rotations that would let me pursue an international project. And then I also have other interests in like history and maps. And so that's actually played a big role in me picking my current thesis topic of typhoid fever, which is a very historical disease with a lot of interesting characters who developed different techniques and approaches over the years. And also map-wise, I do genomic epidemiology. So that's looking at genomes and relatedness of the bacteria, but putting them on a map and trying to compare them with other different structures or layers of, I don't know, water bodies or topography or things like that. So yeah, so picking a couple things and letting the rest be flexible, I think is very aligned with what Ali and Bilal both also said.
Great, thanks. So, and I don't see Nipun, so unless you're here under some other name, Nipun, and you want me to make you a co-host, we might have to come back to him later. He must be having some sort of technical difficulties. So we'll move ahead.
I shot him a text and I haven't heard back either.
Okay.
It might have come up.
All right, let me know if you hear anything from him, Michael. And in the meantime, we'll just go to you, Dr. Keegan, if you want to start sharing your slide.
Okay, so I'm going to try to share my screen again and see if that works.
And while she's getting that ready, I have a question from Christopher at this point. It's the only one I have so far. And I was really hoping Nipun would be here to help you answer it, but I bet you that later on, Allie might be able to help answer it. It's about sort of a non-traditional MD, PhD path. But keep your questions coming. I'm watching for them, so let them roll in. And off you go, Dr. Keegan, thanks.
All right, thank you. So it's great to be here. I'm the Associate Director for MSTP at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. And so I'm just going to go through relatively quickly the classic AAMC slide deck to answer the question whether the dual degree pathway is right for you. So first thing is, who are biomedical scientists? And I'm sure you all are already in this criteria since you're here. These are people that are just really fascinated by human biology and disease. You have an aptitude for science and you're very curious. So you're one of those kids that ran around driving your parents crazy, always asking, well, why is this and why is that? And how does that work? Are you creative and have persistence to see projects from the very beginnings of an idea to perhaps a great discovery? And so biomedical scientists try to use the power of research to understand and cure human diseases. Sometimes it's not as direct if you're a PhD only, but sometimes it is very clinically related. So there are many different pathways to become a successful biomedical scientist. So some can choose to do an MD only and then pursue research later, typically during fellowship years. And so this is a path that many people traveled very successfully back in the 60s and 70s. And so there are a lot of sort of elderly or aging, very famous and successful scientists who have MD onlys. And that was possible back in the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. It's a little bit more difficult now just because of the length of training and the competitiveness of getting R01 grants. It's much, much more competitive now than it was in those days. But it is a path. But in this case, you don't get any really research training until fellowship. And in that period, you have to be very lucky to have a great mentor who's going to really help you to become a scientist at that stage. There's, of course, the PhD only option. And these are people that are just completely wanting to do research-based work. And they are frequently located at biomedical research centers, so they do have relationships with clinicians or other people who are more clinically minded. But PhDs are really much more focused on the science of it all, which is, and I'm a PhD scientist, so I know that route very well. Then there's the dual degree recipients, which is why everybody's here today. So a dual degree combines the educational training path for medicine and for doctoral research. And it's better than just doing the two educational processes separately, because when you do a combined program, everything is actually streamlined. So it's not just, I'm going to medical school and then I'm going to move over to graduate school. The top programs have integrated the training such that you're always thinking of things as a physician scientist from day one. And so you have mentored integrated research and medical training. You conduct mechanism-based research that can be completely basic science or it can be more medically relevant. It depends on the topic. And as I said, you could do these separately, but it's not as efficient and it's not as effective at generating physician scientists. So those are the basic paths. So an MD PhD blends the discovery of new knowledge with clinical medicine. And sometimes they actually show the chimera, the animal, showing a physician scientist is really a unique beast in that they can work in both arenas. And some of you may already know that the environment, the vocabulary, the way of thinking of a pure basic scientist is actually quite different from an MD, and their motivations are quite different. So to be a physician scientist, you have to be able to really traverse both of these worlds and speak both sets of languages, and to really get the other people excited. So you want to get basic scientists on board, you want to get MD onlys on board, perhaps to get you clinical samples, etc. So you really need to be a chimeric type of a person. So where is the training done? So it's done all over the country. There are approximately 90 MD PhD programs in the nation affiliated with medical schools, and approximately half of those are partially supported by a special training grant from the National Institute of General Medicine, known as the Medical Scientist Training Program, or an MSTP. So actually, if you go to the website of NIGMS, which is at NIH, you can see the list of schools that actually currently have MSTP grants. And this is a nice thing. It's a badge of honor because the program has gone through very careful peer review and has been acknowledged as a very top program to win this award. They have NIH funding to help support the students. But there are also other non-MSTPs that are very fine programs too. So you can search for both types of programs. Whether or not a program has an MSTP from NIH, it's still true that most of the programs offer pretty generous financial support that includes annual stipends, tuition waivers for medical school and graduate school, as well as health insurance. And so that's something you should look into when you're exploring different programs, is their level of support. So the goal of these streamlined programs is to prepare you for a career that combines both research and clinical care with an emphasis on research. So really, if you're only interested in being a clinician and practicing medicine, you do not need a PhD. And that's not what this program is for. This program is designed to train physician scientists who absolutely want to run a research program as part of their career. And so again, somebody who just wants to be a clinician, you know, this is not the right place. The curriculum integrates both MD and PhD training, in general completing both between 7 to 8 years, depending on the programs. Many schools offer a number of different PhD choices, but each school has a unique set of PhD options. And some of them have what are called non-traditional PhD options available, such as anthropology or social sciences. But not every program has those things. So you really need to explore different programs and see what PhD options they have available to you. Some of them have bioengineering, but some don't. So again, you need to do some homework. And also, as I said, most programs offer extensive financial support. And this is because the community has recognized the value of having physician scientists. And so the federal government is willing, and the universities are willing, to pony up actually a lot of money to support students as they progress through these programs. So this little cartoon shows sort of a generic program of study. This is the classical format, and many programs still have this format. Other programs have different ones, and again, each one is unique, and you have to do some research on their websites to see how they're actually structured. But as I said, most of them are in this format where you start out doing the preclinical curriculum, so you're mostly in medical school, and you'll have some graduate school elements as well as some unique MSTP elements, which are mostly in medical school. And then after the first 2 years, and after taking the step 1 exam and passing that, then you transition into mostly graduate school. So you'd be taking graduate school courses and doing your laboratory research, publishing papers, etc. So you spend most of your time in graduate school. You may have some medical school activities, or you may have some other MSTP unique activities that are ongoing, but again, it's mostly graduate school. And then once the graduate process is complete and you successfully defended your thesis and completed other MSTP requirements, then you can return to the 3rd and 4th years of medical school. So again, then you're mostly into your clerkships and eventually into your internships and sub-Is, et cetera, in 3rd and 4th year. And then again, you may have some other graduate school activities as well as MSTP specific activities. So this is sort of the classic example. There are other programs where students actually finish their 3rd year of medical school before graduate school, as well as some other activities. Others are very flexible and let individuals choose how they want to progress. But again, you have to look specifically at individual programs. All right, so programs have many, many opportunities to help you maintain an identity as a physician scientist. So programs will have student councils where students have input on the curriculum. You have MSTP specific courses and workshops, visiting scholar seminars. They all have retreats. You can participate in national MD-PhD organizations like the National MD-PhD Student Conference, where you can meet other MD-PhD students across the country. It's a great way to network. And there's lots and lots of mentoring for transitioning from medical school to graduate school and back. And then also lots of mentoring for selecting residencies that are going to be friendly to a physician scientist pathway. And this is a really, really important step in the physician scientist career. And in general, it's the MSTP community, and even just nationwide, it's a community of interested parties, and it's not just your individual program. So we have, as directors, we have MD-PhD directors meetings every year where we all meet each other and share best practices on training. There's been a lot of emails and virtual meetings recently on how to deal with the COVID-19 issues in our programs, et cetera. So it's a wonderful community for students to be a part of, but also for the directors and administrators. So after the program, the majority of graduates go into a residency and hopefully into a nice physician scientist friendly residency program, and potentially fellowships as well. So that, depending on which residency was selected, that'd be another 3 to 7 years of training, and then perhaps with selection for fellowship, where you can actually have the majority of your time spent in research. And this, of course, is a very important time for trainees to develop their own research program and to get independent funding to really launch their careers. 75% of graduates ultimately become medical school faculty. 65% of graduates continue to do significant research as part of their career, and that's defined as greater than 50% of their time spent in research. Here's an important point. 40% of NIH grants to MDs are received by MD-PhD scientists. And actually, there's been a number of studies to show that based on percentages, the physician scientist, MD-PhD dual degree holders are the best at garnering NIH grant money. So it's well recognized that they have what it takes to run an R01 based research program. Many graduates fill academic leadership roles, and there are alternate pathways. So many graduates go on to work in industry, some of the big companies, pharmaceutical companies, as well as biotechs, and also at other research institutions like NIH or FDA or Howard Hughes. So those are the types of places where graduates are. This pie chart just is a visual representation of that, showing you where are the MD PhDs. As you can see, the majority are in academia, with some in research industry as well. There are some that end up in private practice for a variety of reasons. This is not too surprising. There's things that do happen, but again, if you just want to go into private practice, this is not the path that you'd want to take. So here are just some examples of highly successful MD PhD scientists, just to give you an example. Here's Diana Milowitz, is actually the director of the program at in Texas, and she's studies cardiovascular medicine genetics, and she actually sees patients that have aneurysms, both the classic aortic aneurysms and dissections that are observed with warning, but also some that for patients that have aortic dissections without aneurysm formation. We have Jose Cavazos, MD, PhD, who's the director of the program in San Antonio, and he is a neurologist who studies the plasticity of the brain in order to better treat seizures and epilepsy. And then Juanita Merchant, who studies transcriptional regulation in the gastrointestinal peptides that regulate growth in cancer, and she's a practicing gastroenterologist. So these are just examples of how physician scientists integrate their clinical practice with their research interests. So applications, so some of you may be getting ready to begin this process. So key elements in a successful application. So in your application and through everything that you write, you want to really demonstrate creativity, demonstrate leadership potential and congeniality, the ability to work in teams, and the ability to address big questions. And of course, we want applicants with integrity and maturity. Applicants should have productive research experiences, so enough experience that you know what research is all about and that you know that you love it. You want to spend the rest of your life doing research. You want to explain very clearly what is your rationale for the dual degree. And this is something that we look at very, very carefully. So this is really important for you to think, do some thinking about why do you want to do both degrees and how is this going to be critically important for what you want to do. Letters of recommendation are always important, but especially you want letters from your research mentors. And those letters should definitely directly address your capacity to do research in the context of this research itself, but also in the context of your being a physician scientist. It goes without saying, these are very competitive programs, so you're going to need an outstanding academic record, competitive MCATs. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then you also need to demonstrate that you care for other people, because the medical profession is a service profession. And we're looking at, for evidence that you actually care about other people. And you can show this in a variety of ways, but typically it's community service activities. And these can be of any kind that is of importance to you. It doesn't necessarily have to be medically related. It certainly can be if you want to, but there are many other ways to get involved in community service that are certainly important as well. And then we look at extracurricular activities and other life experiences that make you a unique person and that have impacted your life and your life choices. So all these things are considered. So students always ask what constitutes a substantial research experience. And as you know, you now have to report hours of research on your MCAT, and we actually do look at that. But it's not exactly something that we're counting like bean counters. We want to make sure that you have sufficient research experience to know what you're getting into, as I said. So this can take the format of having multiple summer projects. You were all at University of Maryland College Park, so you actually have lots of opportunities to get involved in research. So you could do a senior research project, not necessary, but certainly adds to the weight of your research experience. You can have 1 or more years pursuing research after undergraduate degree. So we do have a number of applicants do postbacks. I'd say it's about 50-50. About half of our applicants are coming straight out of undergrad and matriculate just fine. But many of them have done 1 and 2 year postbacks. You really want to make sure you know what you're doing in your research experience. You have to really understand what the basic problem is that you're addressing. You need to be really familiar with the hypothesis that you're testing, because you're going to be asked, what was the hypothesis of your project? You need to explain the hypothesis and then describe how your experiments actually are testing the hypothesis. How do the results that you're getting from your experiments impact your hypothesis? So it's not just knowing the method. So it's not just technical, how do you run a PCR? It's really understanding how the data from your PCR addresses your hypothesis. So you really need to know that and be able to answer questions. Okay, so this is just showing you the number of MD PhD admissions in 2016. It's about 650 compared to the total MD, just to give you some numbers. These are more statistics. Nationally, there are about 4,500 total trainees. In the 2017-18 class, 44% of those are women, and that matches the applicant pool pretty well. 16% are students of diversity. About 1/3 of all applicants ended up matriculating in an MD PhD program. And on average, there are about 13 applications per applicant. Here's some metrics just to give you an idea, like when we say we want you to have strong academics, what do we mean? This shows you in terms of the average applicant pool. The mean MCAT of the NEWS test was 510. Average GPA was 3.6. For the matriculants, the mean MCAT was 515 and the GPA was 3.8. But we want to really stress that the admissions programs use a holistic approach. So there's no bar at most of the programs for cutoffs. Student applications are examined completely from top to bottom. And the research experiences, the letters, and your personal statements are incredibly important as well. So if you are worried that your that your GPA and MCATs are kind of not in this mean area, please look at the ranges. So the MCAT ranges for both the applicant pool and especially for the matriculant pool, as you can see down here, are quite diverse. So you even see, people with undergraduate GPAs of a 2.8, of course, all the way to a 4, eventually being matriculated into an MSTP. I will point out that we often see that those students that have GPAs that would be considered not optimal, so those below a 3 or in the low 3s, frequently do a master's program or some other kind of post-bac activity, so they can take high-level courses and demonstrate they can do well and get good scores. And those are frequently a very good way to mitigate a GPA that you might be concerned about. Okay, so this shows you your timeline. I guess the majority of you are somewhere around in here. So you would have already hopefully started taking courses that are prerequisites for med school, getting involved in research, doing your clinical shadowing, which is very important to demonstrate what doctors do and not just think about Grey's Anatomy or something like that, that some reality of what doctors do, and that you're participating in extracurricular activity. And I know Wendy knows what she's doing, so she can give you the great advice on this. So then, as you know, if you plan to apply directly to medical school from college, you need to be planning your application for this coming summer. So that means you would be needing to plan to take your MCATs and get them ready, work on your essays and work on gathering your letters so that you can be ready to apply as soon as the AMCAS portal opens up. So they typically open up, I think, in June. I haven't heard this year when it's going to open. And so then you want to do your best, the best that you can, to get your AMCAS applications completed and submitted as soon as you possibly can. And you'll see that different programs list a variety of different deadlines on their websites. And many of them also do rolling admissions. So I'll tell you that even if a deadline says November the 20th, don't wait to November the 20th, especially for those that do rolling. They'll start selecting applicants to interview in August, and they'll start filling their interview slots and start making offers, and they're going to start running out of interview slots and offers. So if you wait to quote the deadline, you are in fact late. They'll accept your application, but you're going to be competitively late. So that's just a word of advice. Try to do as best you can. Obviously, if you're waiting for an MCAT score or you're waiting for something that you think is critically important, then you have to do what you have to do. But my advice is to get it in as early as you can. Okay. Then you go through the fun interview cycle, and then you wait. And right now it's April 15th. Applicants are waiting, and they're waiting, and hopefully everybody will hear exciting news soon. And then summertime, when you get the news, then you start and you matriculate into your programs. So interviews, these are really, really important. And in many previous years, these have been in person. We hope this coming year they will be in person, but with COVID-19, we don't know. So we don't know what's going to be happening during interview season. And maybe we'll have to be creative with virtual interviews. But nevertheless, these personal interviews are really important. And you need to be on your best game, and you need to show your personality and creativity. You should have strong communication skills, practice your interview skills. When you go, you need to show you're interested in the program, even if they're number 10 on your list. If you go to the interview, you should be interested, and then you should act like you're interested. Absolutely, you should be able to describe your research experiences in detail. Again, as I said, focusing on how your data impacts the hypothesis and would impact your project. You should show that you're excited about it and passionate about it. You're definitely going to have to describe your motivation for pursuing a dual degree, and again, show your passion and excitement for this. Be able to address anything that's in your application. So anything you write in the application, especially, you put in 15 experiences, anything you describe in your essays, anything you're in there is open for question. And so, you might be writing your applications in the summer and you're being interviewed in February. You may have forgotten what you wrote. You should definitely go back and read what you put in your application and be fully prepared to talk about anything that's in there. Always in the most positive light. You should be able to define your career goals. And even if you don't know exactly what you want to do, you can at least describe some areas of interest at the time, whether it's cancer research or neurology or whatever it may be. And of course, you can acknowledge that you might change your mind once you experience medical school and see the research opportunities available to you. But certainly you shouldn't just say, I don't know, whatever. That won't go over very well. And then you should have specific questions about the program, and have these questions in your back pocket, because you're going to have interviewers ask you, well, do you have any questions for me? And it really is not a good thing if there's dead silence and you say no. Even if it's the 10th interview of the day and everyone has absolutely answered every one of your questions, just ask them again, because that just doesn't go well. Other things that may go without saying, but sometimes you'd be surprised that you do need to say these. Please dress professionally. Go to monster.com and look up what you're supposed to wear when you go on job interviews and what you're not supposed to wear. Always speak professionally, even when you're interacting with the other students. Frequently there's a lot of dinners and lunches and other activities where you're just talking to students. But still be professional. and never use swear words. Again, surprising you have to say this, but this does happen. Not a good thing. So just be aware of that. And so from the other side, what should you look for when you're going on these interviews? You're going to look for the research environment. What activities does the program have that are unique for MSTP students? And do they actually do them? Sometimes programs will list them on their website, but they don't actually do them. So you can talk to the students to find out what is really going on, find out about faculty and research opportunities. Understand the academic environment. What is the personality of the environment? What is available to you in terms of the curriculum? Is the program highly integrated? You can look at what the alumni have done and what is the level of community involvement in the program. Of course, there's some sort of very, logical or lifestyle issues, such as where is the program located. This may impact, whether you want to be close to family or significant others can impact how much location is important to you or not. And then also what's really important after going on these visits is whether it's a good fit for you. There are a lot of really fantastic programs out there, but the environment and the personality of the program may not just work well for you. And it's just something that you need to find out by going and interacting with people at those programs. So those are the things that the students should be looking at during the interview process. And of course, there's many, many places to get information. There's, of course, Wendy. You can ask Wendy anything you want to know. The AAMC has a specific site dedicated for dual degree, as does NIH. And there are many directors and mentors of other programs that are always available for you to contact and get questions answered. And as we have now on this panel, you have students that you can ask questions to and have your questions answered. So that's the end of my slide deck, and I'm going to stop sharing so we can get ready for the question session.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. So Nipun did join us, and I'm going to ask him now to introduce himself, and then we've been getting some wonderful questions, so I'm going to start to moderate those out to the group. So are you ready to go? Say hello to the crowd?
Yes, I am. Sorry, all that I'm all over the place today, but my name is Nipun Kodige. I graduated from Maryland in May 2019 with degrees in anthropology and biochemistry, and this past year I've applied to MD-PhD programs in anthropology and plan to matriculate one in this fall. So, and I guess in terms of research interest, I'm really interested in the ways that institutions and society kind of structure how environments look and how that actually ends up shaping health disparities that we see.
So that's a good jumping off point to our first question. And I hope it won't put you on the spot, but I'm going to call out who asked the question. And then maybe if you want to, maybe to make this feel a little bit more like we're all in the same room, if you would uncover your video if you want to, and maybe you can unmute yourself and I'll ask the question and I'll point to a couple people I think are good to answer it. And then if you have any follow-up questions or anything, you can, we can fully explore it. So the first question is from Christopher, and he said, hi, Wendy, nice to see you, which I thought was very nice. He's interested in figuring out MD PhD programs, how receptive they are to applicants in the social sciences and education. He wants to approach the application from a health, bioethics, disparities, education angle. And so he actually knows Northwestern has one, and I don't know, Bilal, if you know anything about that, but he's, I think he's also a psych major, so I thought maybe we would start with Ali and Nipun, because this is sort of your area where you did non-traditional interests, and then if you know anything to add to that, Bilal, maybe you will do as well. So Ali, you want to go first?
Sure. I was actually able to chat with Christopher a little bit, but just to kind of summarize what we talked about, I think that One of the things that I learned is that the name of your PhD program like kind of doesn't matter if you get the experience that you want to go to the next step. So I came into the MD PhD pretty sure that I was going to do a neuroscience PhD and that I wanted to do neuroimaging. That became less of a priority to me as I had other experiences and things. So I found the lab that I wanted to join, and I was very set that this was the right mentoring relationship and topic for me. But I could fall into a lot of different PhD programs. And so it kind of came down to, what is the required coursework look like? And does that give me the, fundamental training to pursue the research that I wanted to do? So I think the research programs can be more flexible than you think, at least in my experience. I think it can be different in the case of like anthropology, because especially if you want like an international component, because I think that's just less common in most other PhD programs. But in my experience, like I could have done a neuro PhD. I am in a human statistical genetics PhD. I considered a public health PhD. But fundamentally, I'm still getting the same training that I want to do. So I think instead of focusing so much on the programs that are available, really making sure that you identify there are multiple faculty that could support the interests that you have. Because if one person is kind of holding up that entire part of your training, people leave, circumstances change by the time you're ready to go to your PhD. So having multiple people there that could mentor you through that process. And then I do think you have to take into account, if you want the bioethics training and a program doesn't have the bioethics agreement for that PhD, but there's, you can kind of see a workaround in the program, that's one thing. But if you want that kind of education or bioethics training, and it's very clear that the program's priority is much more basic science training focus, I think that's kind of an indicator that it might be a little harder to find a path that works for you in the dual degree.
And what would you add, Nipun?
I would say I would agree with everything Ellie said, but I think a different angle is that for some PhD programs, it does matter. Because, well, for anthropology, which is like super particular, you have to do a separate application. And so on one hand, I could have done a like clinical translational science PhD at another institution, and that would have been flexible and gotten me the things that I need to get out of and want to get out of my training in terms of methods and the types of projects I want to work on. But if I wanted to, for example, like do anthropology specific research and then, for example, present at like anthropology conferences and publish in anthropology journals, there's certain institutions that have established programs that are better for kind of pursuing that path. And so I think the question that I was really asking is, what are the things that I can compromise on and what are the things that I can't compromise on? And so for me, I think having a rigorous like anthropology training of those specific classes was really important to me, and working with anthropologists was really important to me. And so I chose institutions that had that. But actually, when I was applying, I was actually kind of looking at both. The other side of it is, for some fields, it's not necessarily a convention to get a PhD as a terminal degree. So like public health and MPH is like super common. And so there's different ways to actually get there. And I think having a mentor that is in one of those fields right now is probably a really good way to sort that out for yourself. And of course, you can reach out to us.
Yeah, nice. Would you add anything from a Northwestern perspective, Bilal? Do you know anything about this?
I just know that there's a lot of flexibility, at least at Northwestern, to do what may be considered as non-traditional PhDs. I know there's a PhD program in health services research for, health services administration and understanding how to kind of deliver healthcare systems. There's research in some of the more classical social sciences, but I think the important thing to consider is like, what do you aim to do? I think individuals that are in Dr. Keegan's role and, and the directors of various programs, they're really looking to see how do you want to contribute to medicine? and in what way? And is it for the purpose of advancing our current boundaries and unlocking new answers that will help push the barriers of medicine? And how can you do that with, you know, your interests? And I think that all sorts of sciences can accomplish that goal, whether that be a social science or a basic bench science or a clinical, more translational science. So I think if you think about the goal of kind of advancing the field of medicine and how what you want to pursue fits into that, then it's all about messaging to the program and finding those programs that have the resources that you care about, like Nipun said, the things that you're willing to or not willing to compromise on.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Matthew. And Matthew says, during the PhD years of the MSTP program, are there any differences between your training and that of a traditional PhD program outside of the different timeline? And on the flip side, does your MD training differ in any way? And Michael, do you want to take a stab at that? And then maybe Dr. Keegan, from your perspective, could you weigh in? Does that sound like a good way to go?
Sure.
Okay.
So Michael will
Sure,
probably
thanks for the
answer it for me.
Thanks for the question, Matthew. Yeah, I mean, inevitably the structure of the program is going to be different between the 2 years that you start in medical school and then when you transition to your PhD and then back to the clinical years of medicine. But in terms of the actual differences in training and that of a traditional PhD program, I know, for example, at Maryland, and I'm sure at there's always a clinical component. And so that's going to be added seminar work. We do clinical case studies, and we have visiting professors who come and talk to us about a career in the MD PhD, like following an MD PhD trajectory, just because you're set up to bridge clinical medicine and translational research, whereas a basic or just a PhD side could much easily tend away from the clinical portion. So I'm sure that manifests a little differently each program and how they emphasize that, but during your PhD years of an MD PhD program, you definitely will have clinical integration. And it also sort of sets you up for the types of questions you'll answer. For example, my project and my focus is on typhoid fever, and I'm looking at the genomics of it. I could do a very, very genomic heavy focus of that, but I'm also interested in the clinical manifestations and how that actually affects people. And so my training inherently lends itself more towards that. And when you have an MD PhD program headed by people like Dr. Keegan and our other director, Mary Claire Rogman, they support that. So you can sort of I want to say get away with, but it's not really that. You can shift the focus towards a more clinically oriented project as well. Dr. Keegan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, again, as you said, it will vary from program to program exactly how they're different. But yes, we'd say yes and yes. Your PhD trajectory is somewhat different than PhD onlys, and your MD trajectory is going to be different than the MD onlys. And you want that to be the case, because otherwise you could just go to medical school and then go to graduate school, and then you would have the exact same training as every other PhD and every other MD. The MSTP training is unique. So the good thing is that in terms of the PhD training, at least for our program, students get credit, graduate school credit for their medical school preclinical courses. So they have less of a graduate school course load than PhD onlys. And so they can get into their research labs quicker, about 6 months quicker. And then on the other side, there are things that our students do in graduate school that are MSTP specific. So these are elements that we have designed that are unique to our students that actually earns them medical school credit. So for example, our students don't have as many elective requirements as MD onlys. So their MD experience is different. And of course, there's a big gap in between. So that's a big difference. They've stopped out for a PhD along the way. So for Matthew, the answer is yes and yes. Hey.
Could I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, of course.
So for the topics that were touched on with how the trainings differ, specifically at Maryland, how you have those different credits that can be exchanged between the two programs. Would that be is Maryland's program an example of one that's more integrated than a lot of other schools? Because I know you were saying, Dr. Keegan, that some schools are more integrated in their MD PhD programs than others. So I was just wondering, where on the spectrum does Maryland's exchanging of credits sort of fall?
Well, that's hard to say, not knowing the precise credit details of every program. Maybe some of your other students at other programs can comment on their programs, but my interpretation is that we are highly integrated. Any other students have comments on the degree of credit sharing at their programs?
So I'm at WashU in St. Louis, and I agree with all of the credit swapping things. So like your time to degree is shortened through a lot of those. But WashU is definitely less integrated in the sense that there aren't too many requirements. While you're in one phase of training, there are not too many requirements for you to fulfill for the other phase of your training directly that require you to spend time doing things you're not already doing. So you can seek out those opportunities. Like during my PhD, I've been trying to volunteer at the student-run free clinic to have more clinical experience, but there is zero required clinical training during the PhD. And I feel like the attitude is it's mostly encouraged to focus on your PhD while you're in your PhD and focus on your MD while you're in your MD. So I would say WashU is less integrated, like on the less integrated side of where programs span. WashU is also overhauling their curriculum. So the actual curriculum timing will look a little different, but I think the separation is still pretty much there in terms of when you're in your MD, you're fulfilling those requirements, and some of those requirements count for PhD things and vice versa, but actual day-to-day, what you're required to do is not that different, except, you know, we have like a weekly MSTP journal club that we can go to throughout the whole time in the program, like small things like that, but the bulk of what you spend your time doing is not that much different than your peers in whichever side of the training you're on at a given time.
Yeah. At Northwestern, there's some pretty good integration between the two phases where kind of the course load is reduced by half to, pretty much half the number of credits. So it unlocks more research time to focus and actually play around and get a sense of what it is you'd like to explore. So that lends itself nicely. And then the other way to think about it that is unique to MSTP programs is because there's this sort of 2 years of medical school and then you start your PhD phase, those first 2 years of medical school almost directly contribute to your knowledge base and how you are able to participate in the research phase. And something really nice to be aware of is after you come out of step one, you kind of, at least in Northwestern, you start into your rotations and picking a lab. You almost have developed a robust enough knowledge base to be plopped into really any lab on the campus and start actively engaging and understanding what's going on, because your sort of fluency in the biomedical space has been ramped up significantly just by the first 2 years of medical school. So that's something unique to MSTP programs, I would say, and in how you can play around with what you've learned.
Nice. The next question is from Michal. What do MSTP specific activities typically entail? So I don't know if that might have been a contextual question that you typed when Dr. Keegan was talking, or does anybody know how to answer that?
So again, I mean, that's going to depend on the program. So for example, at our program, we have a course called Molecules to Medicine that all MSTPs take during the first 2 years of medical school. And so they're taking medical school courses, but they also take our course, which is a basic science-based sort of a journal club on Nobel Prize winning work. And it meets about every other week for about 1 to 2 hours. just so that they can talk about science again. And actually they really like it because they're tired of memorizing a bunch of stuff, and then they can talk about data. So that's an activity. Another is the clinical case studies course, which all GS 2 and 3s have to take when they're in graduate school. And this is an activity where we have clinicians come in and work with the student together to present a clinical case to the group. And so that meets about once a month, and every student presents a case once a year for those 2 years. So those are MSTP specific activities that we've designed for our program. Other programs may have different activities, and those are just 2 examples, and Michael can add some more that we have, and maybe some of the other students can name 1 or 2 MSTP specific activities that they have in their programs.
Bilal, anything come to mind?
And Alexandra mentioned the journal club, so that's one, an MSTP specific journal club.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it can be anything. It can be happy hours. It can be, we have a women's physician scientist group. They get to, there's any number of things. Depends on the program.
Yeah, so we have grand rounds once a month. And what that is for the MSTP program is you're all split into teams, and the teams are kind of vertically integrated throughout the program. So you have M1s, M2s, G-phase students, clinical year, and a vignette is sent out to the entire program by one of the clinical phase students, and they give just enough information for you to start building a differential diagnosis. And you have to work in teams to kind of take your top 3 guesses of what does that patient, what condition is that patient dealing with, and how would you test for it. And then you all kind of compete to see who can, who gets the most accurate answers over the year. And then once a month we have a dinner where everything's catered, it's really nice food, and then the clinical student presents the case, takes you through the actual clinical management and algorithms and understanding what the best next steps are for them. And then a research phase student comes on and gives a more detailed talk on some of the underlying science that is being done on that specific topic and kind of where the field is at currently. So that's just one example. And like Dr. Keegan was saying, there's all sorts of things, and you can also create your own things.
Yeah.
Nice, thanks. The next question is from Christopher. Is there an MD PhD equivalent of the MSAR? There's not. So I know you typed that question when Dr. Keegan was talking about metrics for MD PhD admission. So here's my experience working with the MD PhD applicants at Maryland as they go forward into the application cycle. I tend to tell them that they should look at the MSAR and think about their metrics in relation to who that medical school would normally admit to any program. And what's different, I think, is fit in terms of research. And Dr. Keegan is definitely going to weigh in on this, I hope. But from my perspective, I think that there's a lot of folklore out there that makes students self-select out of applying MD PhD because they think they have to be so much better than the regular applicant pool to get a look. And that has not been my experience. They have to be different. They have to be good. They have to fit the metrics of the school, but they also have to fit the research, vibe with the school. And I think, so I really encourage students, toward this path if it's what they want and they have a really solid research background, if they have the right sort of average metrics for medical school. And our students do very, very well. MD PhD is always our highest yield applicant, part of our applicant pool. It's always in the high 80s to the low 90s. Now we have 15 applicants, so it's a very small n, but that means most of them are getting in. So they do self-select pretty well based on the fact that they have a real passion for research and good experience with it. What would you say, Dr. Keegan? And then I'm going to ask you.
What do those initials stand for? MSPR?
Oh, MSAR, the medical school admission requirements. It's put out by the AAMC.org, and it just yeah.
Okay, so if your scores, your MCAT and your GPA are anywhere around the mean, you are absolutely going to be competitive. Those are benchmarks that you need to have to be competitive to get into medical school. Medical school is actually very hard, and they want to make sure that when you come into medical school, you can be successful and pass the curriculum. So that's why they're looking at those scores, to make sure that, you know, you can handle the rigor of the academic challenge, because it's much harder than undergrad, and everybody else can attest to that. But what we are looking for the research passion. We want people who have the capacity to be great scientists. And so your research experience, your letters from your research mentors, your own personal statements and your personal journey, and why do you want to do this? Why is this an important life goal for you? Is really, really important. So if you think that your scores are kind of average, then and you have the research chops and you have the passion, then you're going to be competitive.
That's exactly how I view it. And Nipun, you've just lived through it. So do you want to weigh in there a little bit?
I think so. I think that's pretty accurate. I think it's analogous to applying for a job and your GPA is on the resume. Like, they might look at it to see if you like qualify and did well in your classes,
Right.
but then after that, they're going to look at your experiences, and then most importantly, like, ask you, like, why do you want to do this? Do you have a reasonable expectation for what you're getting into, and does this actually advance your own goals? Because they're really just looking for people that they can mentor to train the next generation of physician scientists.
Yeah, good. So Matthew asks, for the current MSTP students, did you solely apply to both MD and wait, I guess the question is, did you apply to MD and MD PhD programs? Did you just apply to MD PhD? And if you applied to both, how did you approach writing your personal statement? I don't think anybody here did that.
I
Did you?
I only applied MD PhD.
And Bilal, you only applied MD PhD. Did you apply to both, Nipun?
No, but I have some thoughts about it.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do
too. Yeah.
And Michael, you applied MD only, but you already told your story. You came in, you from an internal perspective. So let's all give our thoughts. I think it's a really, really important question, and it comes up every year. So my feeling is they are very different careers. And if you know that you want to do MD PhD, especially based on, let's feed this question off of the last question. Sometimes people do this to hedge their bets because they're worried about their metrics. So I think maybe with the last question, we dealt a little bit with the fact that, you need to get behind your application as a medical school applicant and then apply how you want. So I do not ever advise students apply to MD and MD PhD. I think you got to jump in with both feet and apply how you want and line your application, your letters, all of that up to speak to your interest as a potential, research scientist. What do you guys think?
I agree. I agree. So as a program director, and again, different schools will do it differently. So like at Maryland, if you apply MD PhD and you don't get accepted to the dual degree, the MD only will automatically consider you for MD only. Not every school is like that. Sometimes you have to apply separately. But if you apply both trying to hedge your bets, what it says to us is that you don't know what you want to do. That's how we interpret that. And that's not going to be good. We want people that know they want to be a physician scientist. If you don't know when you apply, then sometimes you have to take some time out to do some more reflection so you can understand which path do you really want to go under. And then if you apply MD only and then you change your mind, then most schools have an internal application path. As Michael just said, he did that. We have a number of people who did that as well. But don't do it to hedge bets, because you're not hedging bets. You're actually making things worse, in my opinion.
I agree. Anyone else want to weigh in?
I agree with all those points, and I think that, so I did apply MD PhD, and I think if I did a mix of both, it would be, I'd have this huge identity crisis all the time because they're both like totally different. Though I think as like a social science, as an anthropology like applicant who's interested in doing like public health, like doing work that kind of intersects with public health, it's kind of ambiguous because some institutions it makes more sense to do an MD and like an MPH and then get experience through practice. And there's ways to do that, but again, that's like a totally different path. And I think it really ends up being like, for me, there's some institutions that would have made more sense for me to apply as an MD only, for example, because they have a very strong public health program and then a weak social science and like PhD program. And so, but I think that gets into like kind of weird cases. And so I think that's where you just need to think about what you really want to get out of it.
Just from a mechanics perspective too, Matthew, and I have people do it. So, I mean, we're definitely like, we all jumped right away on that one. And it's just because it does come up every year and I have this conversation a lot and students will do it. So it's not that it never happens. But there are also, from a mechanics perspective, we have to do something different with the committee letter. So, and with your letters of recommendation, right? Because your individual letters for MSTP or MD PhD are really, really research focused, and they better say that you're interested in MD PhD and in that training. So then we have to have a different set of letters that don't say that for your MD only applications. And we do it, like, it's not like that's never happened, but then we have to really coach you like very manually through that, which we can do. You know, we'll do whatever you want to do, but I do think that a lot of the reason that the students who do it is because they're a little bit worried about that metrics question, and I hope we answered that one well enough. Yeah. Okay, Debbie says, what type of research experiences are MSTPs looking for in their applicants? How broad or specific should our research experience be? How does the current pandemic affect how schools are evaluating MSTP applicants for all undergraduate years? Interesting. Okay. How about, I don't know, Bilal, you want to talk a little bit about what research background you had coming in, and maybe Ali, and then do you want to, maybe you can wrap it up, Dr. Keegan, if they leave anything out from an admissions perspective?
Sure, sounds good. Well, as far as my research background, I was very fortunate to have been able to do research for quite some time in a variety of labs. So I may not be the best sort of archetype of this. I was fortunate to have a lot of experiences. But what I'll say is, you know, I think it's more so about what does the student reflect that they have walked away with from their past research experiences. So have they kind of developed a sense of why they care to, you know, why they're interested in being trained as a scientist? What is their understanding of what the scientific training pathway is like intended to do, and how they hope to grow from it? You know, there's a rule of thumb saying like your research experiences should be 6 months or longer, and there should be somewhat in depth. But I think, you know, I would err on the side of trying to go deep and have a really meaningful, fulfilling experience that teaches you about yourself, what you like to do, what you don't like to do. The research experience does not have to be on the topic of what you want to go into. It should rather be an exposure to the life of a scientist and the way of thinking, and helping you, you know, level up towards that. So if you can reflect that you have gained that from your research experiences going in, I think those are the ones that will serve you the best. And that's independent of, you know, whether you're able to publish or not. We understand that there's a lot of, there's many factors going into whether or not you're able to actually publish. Of course, things are stronger if you are able to, but if not, it doesn't take away from the research experience. And that's where we really look into how you talk about it and what you learn from it about yourself and the field. I'll let others jump in.
Ali, do you want to add? You had a little bit of a different research background.
Yeah, so in addition to switching from PhD to MD PhD as an upperclassman, I also went to community college for the first 2 years and transferred to Maryland as a junior. So I did seek out independent study research projects at community college, which really helped me get a sense for, and it was very tied to psychology research and more social science research. And when I got to Maryland is where I was introduced to more of the intersection between biology and psychology, which is kind of what prompted me along to consider the MD PhD path. So my experiences were very broad, but I agree with everything Bilal said, that it's more, have you taken the time to understand what those experiences meant for you and how they're shaping what you know you want to do or what you know you don't want to do? In college, I did some kind of clinical psychology research. I did basic science at NIDA in Baltimore for my undergrad thesis. And then during a post-bac, I worked on several clinical trials evaluating behavioral therapies for smoking cessation. So if you looked at just like the titles of my research projects, there might not be a thread in there, but they all made sense to me at the time. And so I feel like in terms of interviewing and writing essays and all of those things, like really taking the time to reflect on what those experiences meant for you and what they've taught you is going to be really important. And then when you are in an experience, find some way to make it your own. Like even if you are working under a graduate student and it's their thesis or whatever, like you can seek out the opportunity to do some kind of literature review or like ask for help writing an abstract, even if it doesn't get submitted, because at the end, that's going to give you an understanding and an ownership of the project that I also think is important. It's not just important because it's interviewing. It kind of goes back to what I said before, like it's helping you understand the project more and understand the scientific process more. And that's going to inform why you're pursuing the path. So I think it's all kind of related.
Now, I know that Debbie wrote me later and said she had to go to class, but she's going to listen back on this, so she doesn't have any follow-up questions. But I wonder, Dr. Keegan, if you have any thoughts about how the current pandemic is there anything specific that you all are thinking about?
We're still in this cycle, so we haven't actually made plans for the next cycle yet, other than we have discussed the issue of the grades, so we talked about some of the grades maybe pass-fail versus getting a letter grade. And actually, the School of Medicine has some language on their website about this, especially if it's a medical school required course. It would be better to have a grade than a pass-fail designation. But other than that, we have been talking about our deadline because we understand some students have not been able to take the MCATs because of the cancellations of the examination. So we may adjust our deadline to accommodate, a round of testing that will allow the students to get an MCAT score for this cycle. But how that's going to impact how we handle the interviews, we just don't know at this point.
Yeah, and the evaluating. I guess
evaluating shouldn't change.
I don't think
it shouldn't change.
Yeah, I don't think so. I agree. I think it's going to have a bigger impact on people next year.
Exactly.
Because they don't have time to do all the research.
Exactly. So for this cycle, it's really the grades in the spring semester and whether they can get the MCAT score, taken in time. But you're right. The big issue will be research experiences for those who are thinking about next cycle.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Hopefully this is short-lived, or we'll have a whole new set of things to talk about at our next meeting.
Yeah.
Goodness sakes. All right, let's see. So McCall says, one of the slides mentioned that some programs have partial funding for MSTP. Are all students in MSTP funded programs supported by NIH, or does it differ from trainee to trainee?
So that'll differ. So the NIH funding per student does not cover the full cost of the student. So the university then provides the supplemental funds to cover the full stipend, the full tuition, the full everything for those students that are named to the NIH grant. if the program has other students that are not necessarily named to the NIH grant, then the university typically will fund those students either in full or partially, but that depends on the program. So some programs will pay for everything for all students, whether they're on the 232 or not. Others have different policies. So I can just say for Maryland, we fund everybody fully, whether they're named to the 232 or not. So that's something you can ask when you look at the websites or go on interviews.
Does anybody have anything to add? Was that something you thought about, Nipun, as you were applying?
Yeah, so actually that's why I stuck to programs that had established, they had trained Anthro MD PhDs before, because anthropology funding, they tend to do like a TA-ship or something in graduate school rather than getting grant funding from a PI in biomedical science. So really the only programs that tended to support Anthro MD PhDs were bigger programs that had bigger pots of money where they're able to actually like allocate to trainees like me who wouldn't necessarily come under an NIH grant.
Good to know. Good to know.
Also, like WashU, I think this is true for a lot of the like really large programs. So WashU, Penn, like those really big programs, they do have MSTP, but that doesn't cover, like, so if the average class is 25, I think WashU has like 6 or 8 MSTP slots where you're on the NIH grant, but functionally every student gets the same stipend, every student gets the same like health insurance or has access to every like financial resource. It's just a matter of where the school is finding the money to pay them. The only thing that does like matter once you're in the program maybe, but not really for application stuff, is if you're interested in applying to NIH fellowship awards while you're in the program, there are pre-doctoral fellowships that will support your training. And if you're on the NIH grant, that does count towards your years on a fellowship grant. So if you get an individual award, it can be reduced, but I think that's less applicable to people applying. I wouldn't worry about that if you're just applying.
Michal, does that cover your question?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Rodrigo says, hello, what does it mean to buy productive research experience prior to applying to MSTP?
So I think the other answers apply to that. Mm-hmm. The answers they just gave for Debbie.
Yeah, I think that that's true. And I think in the past, Dr. Sullivan has actually shared a statistic that only about 3% of applicants have a publication at the time of applying. That it grows in the course of their application year, so maybe more people who matriculate have a publication, but you know, when you think about productive, it doesn't have to mean that you have a publication, because as has been well described, research is tricky, and sometimes it doesn't go where you think it's going to go.
Yeah, that productive doesn't mean you have a publication. Productive means that you got a good experience, you understood what you were doing, and you could explain what you were doing. So essentially the answers that were given to Debbie are what we mean by productive research experience.
Yeah, good. So, and John, hi John, says, curious about other differences besides funding structures that exist between MST programs and MD PhD. Wait, is this similar to what the last that we just answered, or is it different? Is it, do you have a different question, John?
No, it was rather similar. I was just wondering if there were salient differences that were noted between MSTP and MD PhD in terms of, I'd say, opportunities for integration, or in terms of a class, or if everyone were going sort of on their own research paths, if they were in different specialty areas. So that's all I was wondering.
Does anybody have one?
Yeah, I would say no, it doesn't reflect that at all. What it reflects is that a program submitted a grant to the NIH describing their program, and it was peer reviewed and deemed that this was a very, great program that should deserve additional funding from the NIH to help defray some of the cost. It doesn't say anything about the track or opportunities. I mean, the grant includes some travel money, but it doesn't mean another program without an MSTP doesn't have travel money for their students. So it's really that it's been vetted by the NIH and by a group of peers as to being an outstanding program. That's what it means.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. So Nelson asks, is the 8-year timeline followed for a majority of students, or do some students take longer or shorter? Michael?
I think we're all aiming for a 7-year timeline.
Aren't you aiming for a shorter timeline?
I don't think you can get shorter than 7 years, but 7 years total is what you aim for, but you have to be very realistic. 3 years of a PhD. So for example, 1 year was all classwork and some rotations. Then you have to do your qualifying exam at the end of your coursework, and a qualifying exam could be like a proposal or like an oral exam. It's sort of the culminating exam of graduate school. And then you're a candidate, which you can't hold the candidate title for a year. You really need 1.5 years to 2 years or more. So I would say, just from my peers, I think the numbers are around 85% finish in 8 years, 80% finish in 8 years. And then, 10 or so finish in 7 years. Dr. Keegan, you can correct me on these. And I think it's unusual to go longer than 8 years.
Sound about right?
I think it's much more typical at WashU for it to be 8 years. It's highly dependent on PhD program. If you're doing all dry lab work or something, it might be more typical to finish in 7. The other part of what factors into this is how much flexibility you have of when you go back to the hospital. So for example, at WashU, you're required to do 15 months of clinical training to finish the MD after you're done with your PhD, based on those double counted credits we talked about earlier. But if you wanted to do some kind of residency program that requires an away rotation, which most surgical subspecialties do, emergency medicine, dermatology, some of those programs, 15 months is not enough time to do that in order to be prepared for the residency application portion. So I think it does vary by program and program structure, but at WashU, 8 years is very common. And I think there might be an even split between 7 and 9 years. So the median still works out to 8. And then I think it's like exceptional circumstances where someone might finish in 6 because they were honestly very lucky, and that's really how you get a 6-year program. But I wouldn't like really count on that. And then, if you have some kind of extenuating circumstance, it might take longer than 9. But I think that's also much less common.
I can say that I'm aiming for a 9-year training program, and so because anthropology research is slow and you need to meet people, and that's comparing to anthropology PhDs alone, which sometimes take like 7+ years. And so for me, I've been, and that's different by institution. I think Allie's point that's like 7 years and 9 years and they split at 8 is pretty on point. And I've also been, but honestly, I've been thinking about like what that training time actually means separately. And because like life is going to, at least the people on this panel have told me, life is going to continue going on during that training time. And so I think it's important to remember that you're doing it for a reason, and the things you want to do as a professional are the things you'll do during your training time. And you just need to make sure that you have mentors that won't let it go on for like 10 years or longer than it needs to go on for.
Great. So Spencer asks, in general, is the difficulty of a major, example, engineering versus a social science, considered in the MD PhD application? Dr. Keegan?
As I said, we do a holistic review. So everything is considered in the review of the application. So yes, the difficulty of the major is weighed against the GPA. So, we look at everything.
Yeah, yeah. I think that that's what anybody would say, honestly. I think that's pretty typical. I mean, you have to be good at science. So no matter what your major is, that's got to show up in your courses and in your MCAT. And after that, I think it becomes a little bit less important, and you know, what you learned from what you did. Sherry's got a couple questions. Hello, Sherry. Do you have any suggestions for great questions to ask during an interview to students or to interviewers that can help us really learn about and get a feel for the program? Why don't each of the students answer that really quickly if you can? Do you want to start since you just went through this, Nipun?
So honestly, it changed at different points of my interview cycle. And at the beginning, it was very logistical. And the end, it was a lot more, it was stuff like, because I'm in the social science, it's like does the advising from the MSTP side and the departments of anthropology, do they play nice together? And you get kind of synergistic advising. That was one thing that I was kind of worried about.
Anything else? Anything to
Yeah,
add?
I mean, there are definitely places you can get the stock examples of questions. They're pretty widely available. But I would say for you, the great questions are going to be what you want to know. So if you go into a particular program and there's things that are important to you, that's specifically what are you looking for, then you tailor your list of questions to the administrators and to the students to answer the questions that you really want to know. I mean, you always have to have some generic, questions. How is the advising? How is the transitions handled? Whatever's important to you, I think will be more meaningful because there'll be questions you really want answered.
Yeah.
I think, like, for example, I like to process things on my own and then come back to it. So I actually found the interview a little more stressful because, like, those on-the-spot questions are things that I might reflect on later. You do need to have something to say in person. So I think I spent the time before the interviews to figure out, like, kind of what Dr. Keegan was saying, what aspects of this are important to me. It's a lot easier to say this being in the program versus when I was applying. I did not listen to this advice, but, like, it is true that you're interviewing the school. And so if there are important aspects of who you are as a person and you need that information to decide if this school is going to support you as a person outside of a student, then figuring out what settings feel right to ask those questions, but definitely asking those questions, because if people are put off by the questions you have to ask, then I think that's an indicator that it's not the right school for you.
Michael or Bilal, would you add anything? Are either one of you or any of you on the admissions committee? Yes. So Bilal, what kind of questions do you tend to get?
I would say, like Dr. Keegan said, those students that have really done a lot of diligence on a program and understand what they're looking for will have really informed questions. But a good catch-all, in my opinion, is to kind of ask and probe the students around you, as well as the admissions panel members and other professors, what are their favorite parts about the institution? And what if they were in a role to kind of improve on it, what would their number one thing be to improve the institution? And no one data point should be taken as end all be all. You want to get a sense of what the groups are saying as their favorite things and the things that could use improvement. And that'll give you a good sense of what is it that your institution is strong at and what is it that your institution could use some, work at. And all institutions have their areas for improvement, I would say. So take all those with grains of salt as well. And the last thing I'll say is a good question is, try and get a sense from the students how they would describe their culture. I think that answer will vary everywhere. And I think that is a very important aspect, is who will you be spending the next, decade of your training with and learning alongside.
And then Sherry had a follow-up question. In addition to letters from research mentors, would a letter from a departmental honors thesis research advisor be helpful for admissions to look at, or from a med school summer research program director? These individuals may not see students in lab, but can see engagement in research presentations, poster sessions, journal clubs, etc. Dr. Keegan?
The more the merrier. They're, if they add to the dimensions of who you are and what you've done, and I mean, certainly your thesis, honors thesis research advisor, yeah, that's kind of obvious. Med school summer research program, sure. Add them all in, we read them all.
Yeah. I usually advise any significant research experience should be included in your MD PhD letter portfolio. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. So Christopher had, what's one regret you have about your cycle? What's one thing you wish you'd have known at the beginning? One thing you want the current applicants to know before starting? Nipun?
2 points. The first, I think, is I wish I thought very deep, like a little deeper about what it actually meant to do a PhD in anthropology as opposed to in a biomedical science. So, for example, I had to write like totally separate PhD statements of purpose, which I think biomedical science folks don't have to do. And that's because the professionalization of anthropologists is just different from other sciences. And I wish I knew that I should be looking at, instead of like the degree title, like the specifics of the program and who the people are I'd be working with, because that's super important. In terms of something I wish applicants knew, it's a lot of fun. Like, honestly, I think I've met like some really cool people throughout the cycle, and they've become my friends, and they'll be all across the country as my first professional network as an MD PhD or as an MD PhD student. And I think that just hanging out with them has been a lot of fun and really cool.
Sweet. Michael, would you have anything that you would say here? Like, would you have applied MD PhD if you waited one more year? Or like, is there anything that you would say about that?
Yeah, to answer your question, Wendy, so had I not had the opportunity to defer my matriculation at Maryland for that year where I went abroad and I was in Spain and I did research, I wouldn't have sort of finalized my decision to definitely do research. Had I had that year abroad or done a research activity similar and then applied, I think I would have applied MD PhD. And it's because in that 1 year, I got to design and propose my own project. What was most meaningful to me was I got to mentor an undergraduate student. I'd always been the undergraduate, and now I got to mentor someone through her entire senior thesis, like from the beginning of her senior year to the end through her coursework. And that was just, it was really fun. And to be someone whom we wrote abstracts together, we went to international conferences together, and to just engage in that academic culture. So yeah, I would have, had I not already had sort of a deferment approved by Maryland to come in.
What about you?
I would also,
sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say separately, I would also add 2 things that I just remember from my interview experience was I did not get what MMI interviews were until like I had one, and it was very, very hard for me. Like I guess I wish I would have had more practice or understood what that was. Only one school that I had applied to did that. MMI being the multiple mini interview format, which some schools do, but it was very, for me, uncomfortable, and I did not perform well in that. And then I guess the last thing that I remember back from my interview trail was I didn't want a rural program, and I didn't want a small program. And those seem like generic statistics that you could look up on, like, I don't know, for college, it was always the College Board. And it was like, oh, like class size and like group size. I didn't get what that meant until I visited a school and interviewed there that was rural and that was small and that was new. And I realized that was like a very, very different space that I think many would thrive in. But I wanted something that was a bit more like urban. So those wipe out huge decisions if you can figure those out earlier on. And I ended up withdrawing my applications from different schools that didn't, meet my criteria after that.
That's really good. Bilal, what do you think?
I would say, going back to the process, if I could go do it over again, personally, I'm incredibly happy where I am. So I don't think I would have changed necessarily anything, but some things I've learned about the way to think and assess different programs are, number one, the lifestyle that you would be able to have at the institutions that you are at will, in my opinion, if not already, become increasingly important, because like some of the others on the panel said, life will continue to go on, and the program is rigorous. It's really, really a rigorous program, and it's the best for it, but it also, you know, takes a lot. And so you want to be somewhere where while you're going through that, and, you know, while you're going through a lot of hours and tough times and ups and downs with your research, that the place you're at is a source of comfort to you. So whether for you that means a big city or a rural area or somewhere with a lot of nature or somewhere near your friends and family, like those things are really, really critical when assessing which programs are good for you. And the second thing is, you know, I'm sure a lot of you and all of you will do very well in the process. So those of you that come out and are matriculating into programs and are trying out different labs, I would say to those, definitely pay really close attention to what the work style and atmosphere is of the labs you're interested in. And it's really important. If you're someone that likes to do more dry lab stuff and be left alone and be able to be home and just work remote, seek that out. If you're someone that needs structure and wants to go in and be expected to be in at a certain time of day and spend your time there, seek that out and understand that there are all sorts of atmospheres of work environments, and that's a very important thing for you to put yourself, have some self-awareness and place yourself in the environment where you're most likely to succeed.
Ellie, anything to add?
I think Bilal made a lot of my points. I agree with everything that's been said, and also Michael, what he had to say about the program. For me, going in, I didn't think program size mattered, but at the end, I realized that I did want a larger program, specifically because it meant there would be more women in the program, because the fractions stay the same, but if the class size is larger, there's more women at the end of it. And I am really happy with that decision because, you know, I've made very good friends with 3 of the women I entered with, and they've been a huge support system for me continuing and completing this program. So I think you can't divorce who you are as a person from where you're going to do your training. Also, yeah, I think that was like the main thing. All the other points I had to make were said.
Great. I think like by around 5 o'clock, I think we need to wrap up, and there's a bunch of more really good questions. So I'm gonna try to narrow down like to maybe one person answering each. But so this is from Matthew, and he asks, like this one, it's hard not to ask everybody to answer it, but he says for Ali, Michael, and Bilal, how has your research for your PhD informed the residencies areas of medicine you're interested in? Do you think you could each just answer that super quickly? Okay. Want to start, Michael?
I'll let Ali start. I think she's closest to the...
Okay, Ali.
So coming in, I was super set on psychiatry, and also definitely said I would never consider OBGYN, which is currently my top choice interest based on my research. So psychiatry is still up there, but I have become more open to other paths to the same end, whereas coming in, I was very set on one particular path.
I could summarize mine to just say it has become, oh, sorry, Wendy.
No,
it has become as broad as it could. My PhD focus is on, you know, typhoid fever, so that's infectious disease related, but infectious diseases in like a tropical area or in tropical medicine is quite different than in downtown Baltimore. And recognizing that and finding threads that you enjoy in your research. And I'm asking like, what do people do with a PhD related to genomics? How many of those individuals are also clinicians? I want to talk to them and ask them what decisions they made. So it's informing it, but not in a narrowing way. It's informing it and trying to draw a few threads and look for specialties that would complement that.
Things for me wax and wane. You know, I came into the program thinking I would become a materials scientist and tissue engineer, and that I wanted to implant those materials myself, and that was a really intense sort of career pathway. And as I appreciated the finer things in life, I am open now to saying, okay, maybe I don't want to be a surgeon.
Really?
Maybe, you know, who knows? So, you know, maybe I want to indulge in other things in life too. And, you know, that's less of how the research is informing it. But in the research side, I've also really found an interest in digital health and artificial intelligence and understanding how I can, you know, really open up a conduit of productivity to the world through my clinical interest there. So that's kind of, it's pulling in that direction. Overarching thing is there's going to be a million factors that affect what specialties you're interested in. Be open to allowing those million factors to do that and just go through the process. Enjoy it. Have fun with it.
Thank you, guys.
And then just real quick, is it common for MD PhD graduates to do postdocs? Can just one of you answer? So go ahead, Allie, you're shaking your head.
Yes, I think definitely if you have any connection to basic science, absolutely. I think the length of the postdoc you're expected to do could be shortened, especially if you choose a residency that has built-in research time. So I think it's rare to not have to do a postdoc, but generally postdocs can be shorter for MD PhDs, especially if you do research and residency.
Alex asked Dr. Keegan, do some students entering M3 continue working in their lab after defending? If so, how do they manage that?
So for us, the answer is no. At MS3, you're in clerkships, you have no time to be in the lab. So our third year is basically disappear into the clinic. But in the fourth year, we have, because they've earned so much credit, they actually have a research elective where fourth year they come back to the lab and finish up activities. But third year, not really, no.
Anything different at WashU or Northwestern that you would say?
No, you're not doing any research in M3, and in fact, you're encouraged to like figure out contingency plans for who can finish up experiments that need to be done for resubmissions for papers, because it's really not sustainable to have any type of lab presence M3. WashU, you actually can't get credit for going back to your thesis lab now. That might change in the future, but you can do additional clinical research during your M4 year as an elective, but not with your thesis lab.
About the same?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything's the same. At most, people might do a postdoc and they take time off, but that's not doing M3 and research at the same time. So if there is a compelling reason for you to want to keep doing research, it's like taking a year to do a postdoc. That's the most I've seen.
McCall asks, how does PhD productivity of MSTP students compare with that of a traditional PhD? Does the shortened training time result in lower productivity during the training, and how does that impact them when competing for early career grants, etc.? Who feels like they want to tackle that one?
I'll give it a try.
Oh, go for it, Michael.
Can, but let the students go.
Just very briefly, I felt like I entered graduate school with the title of a first-year grad student, but sort of the ability of maybe a second, maybe not ability, but the network and the foundation of a second-year grad student. Definitely not ability, but what I mean by that is I've already been talking with faculty people for 2 years at that point, and some of which I'd done rotations with, and so you have a sense of rapport with different people and your department, making you poised to be productive earlier. So in that way, I would say probably it's about equal. You're still expected to have the same number of publications, at least at our program. You're still expected to complete all the same requirements, but you're at a position where you're just sort of ready to do a little bit more because you've been there longer.
Yeah, I think it's an urban myth that gets propagated by the PhD onlys. That is, people have that perception. I mean, I train PhDs as well, so I have all the data from our institution. I can see every paper that every PhD has published, including the MD PhDs. And the MD PhDs actually are better or more productive than the PhDs in terms of papers per year spent in the PhD program. So they're definitely not less productive. The reason it tends to take them less time to transit the PhD program is because they've already spent 2 years in medical school taking courses and doing their rotations. So as soon as they start the graduate program, they're 6 months ahead, at least at our school, in coursework, and they've already got their thesis lab. So once they get into graduate school, they're on the ground running. So there is no lack of productivity in terms of the doctoral side. And the data says that they are more competitive at obtaining grants as an MD, PhD. More competitive than MD onlys and more competitive than PhD onlys.
Great. Spencer asks, do you have any thoughts about taking a gap year? More time making a stronger application, but since MD, PhD takes longer, you know, is there more time pressure, more pressure to go straight in? Does, all of you guys took, not you, Nipun.
No, I did.
Oh, you did. That's right. You did.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. From my perspective, we have probably about an even split with our students who take time off versus those who go straight in from Maryland for MD, PhD. And it has an awful lot to do with how much research they were getting involved with pretty early on in their time at Maryland. So for some people, they've been researching since the very word go, and they have a lot of research background. And for some people, they really get started a little bit later on the research. They want to spend a little bit more time in their lab, like Bilal. They fall in love with their lab and they have to like see some project through to the end. So I don't know that I would say it has to be one way or the other. I think it just is where you're at in terms of your how much you've got under your belt and how much time you want before you go in. Do you have you probably have data on how many students take time before they start the MD, PhD?
Yeah, I mean, it's the prefer is not the correct, is not a word, because we don't prefer one over the other. It's just we have applicants who are coming straight out of college and applicants who've spent more time out. It's more whether the applicant is ready, meaning they know this is what they want to do. So you're a junior in college and you have to know you want to be a physician scientist to be ready to apply that summer. So somebody who already knows and they have everything that we've just talked about that you need to be competitive, then there's no reason to wait to do a post-bac or some other experience before you apply. So it's really, what do you want to do? So some people want to take a break from being in school for a while. Some people don't know. They're still undecided. MD, PhD, I don't know. Oh my gosh, what do I do? You take more time to do more activities and more experiences so you can decide what you want to do. And then as Wendy said, if you just decided, you know, the fall of your junior year that you wanted to try some research, you might not really have enough research to be, to show that you know what research is about. So in that case, if you're in that case, then you probably should do a post-bac. But it's not whether we prefer, there's no preference here. And again, it's about 50-50. Half of our applicants are straight out of college and half of our matriculants are straight out of college.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, we're going to do one more question, which is, do you prefer, wait, did I just ask that one? Or is this a different one? Do you prefer?
Oh, maybe I used the wrong adjective. Yeah, prefer, there we go.
Okay, do you prefer applicants to have a diverse research experience from a lot of labs in different fields, or prefer applicants who spend a lot of time in one lab field? So
again, we don't prefer. We have no preference.
Yeah, I think what kind, Ali, you described that you had a lot of different kinds of experiences, but they made sense to you, right? And Bilal, I think you had a couple of different ones. I won't speak for you guys. Go ahead. You talk about your experiences.
Yeah, I can go quickly. I had a lot of different experiences. But I would say, like Dr. Keegan said, it's not so much, you know, the quantity of the experiences. It's definitely the quality of them. And it's about how you can speak to them and say that it informs your career decisions and why you'd like to be part of this program. And then, you know, there's other aspects of research accomplishment in there as well that are factors into all of this. So I would say a research experience that you spend more dedicated time for a longer period of time, you will likely accomplish more than doing many experiences for shorter amounts of time. So, you know, follow your interests and let them guide you. If you're doing research that you find you're not interested in but want to try something else, that's a good reason to switch. if you're seeing a lot of traction and you're growing and you see yourself growing and you like where you're at, stay there.
I think that's a good answer. It's a good place to end. I wanted to, gosh, thank you all so much for what a wonderful panel. I actually think it worked out really well to do it this way. I'm feeling very proficient now in moderating this panel. I'm going to do great next week. I can just feel it. I wanted to say to all of you who are applying this year, I typically do this sort of adopt an MD PhD thing with my students, and some of you, Nipun, did I set you up with somebody? Was it Ali?
With Ali, yeah.
Yeah. So what I usually do is, because there aren't that many of you, I'll reach out to our MD PhDs who are a little bit further, who are in their programs, and try and connect you so that you can learn from them. It's a pretty good way of getting yourself oriented around what the process is going to be like. Don't you think, Nipun?
Absolutely. I think like my conversation with Ali is what solidified that this was a path for me that I wanted to do. So it's like super important and helpful.
Yeah, yeah. And have you been an MD PhD adopter, Michael? I can't remember. Have I ever given you anybody? Or I think I just had you on my committee. So I didn't want to overuse you. I don't know where Bilal went, but I know I've tapped him for that before. So so at some point you're going to get, and I don't make you do it. So if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. But I will be emailing you and asking you if you're interested. And then if you are, I'll make an e-connection and you guys can just take it from there to whatever degree you're both comfortable. So with that, I want to really thank the panel. And thank you all for hanging with us for a couple hours and for making this work. And the recording is available, so if you want to play it back or any part of it, you'll be able to. So thank you all so much, and have a great night.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you.
All right, take
Thanks,
care.
Wendy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.